good evening and warm welcome to our valued investors. I'm Ghazal Jain, Associate Fund Manager, Alternative Investments, and I will be taking you through today's exclusive panel discussion with Mr. Nilesh Shetty, Fund Manager Equity, Mr. Chirag Mehta, Senior Fund Manager, Alternative Investments, and Mr. Pankaj Pathak, Fund Manager, Fixed Income. As we move into the final month of this eventful year, market sentiment is mixed as investors seem to be weighing the mounting virus case count on one hand against the optimism of vaccine breakthroughs on the other. And the question on everyone's mind is, what next? What does 2021 have in store for investors and how can they make the most of it? And so today, the experts at Quantum will spill the beans on what they think the future holds for equity, fixed income, and gold asset classes. They will also discuss asset allocation and the merits of a multi-asset strategy. We have a dedicated time post the presentation for taking live questions, so we encourage you to send across your questions for Nilesh, Chirag, and Pankaj using the chat option. So let's get started with Nilesh and the outlook on equity. That will be followed by Pankaj's outlook on debt, and then Chirag will take over with the outlook on gold, as well as talk to you about the Quantum Multi-Asset Fund. So over to you, Nilesh.
Thank you so much, Ghazal. Thank you everyone for coming to this webinar. My name is Nilesh Shetty. I'm the Equity Fund Manager for Quantum Long-Term Equity Value Fund. Let me start with the equity outlook. And it has been a very exhilarating month for the market, especially in November. So I assume everybody's curious where equities are heading. Let's come to the event that is sort of first triggered the collapse and then the strong rebound, which is the COVID virus. Most countries went through a very large first wave, and then of course it subsided, and especially the developed world is in the midst of a very strong second wave. And you are seeing lockdowns being imposed by the Western world. India, as it stands right now, looks like we are sort of at the end of the first wave. Specific cities are showing a resurgence of second wave or third wave. But as a country overall, it looks like numbers have come down and are plateauing at a certain level. So especially on the COVID front, it looks like we are at a comfortable level compared to our Western peers. There is a lot of good news on the vaccine front. And if we are able to produce vaccines before a large second wave hits us, we perhaps would be much better positioned than most of our Western peers. So at least on the COVID front, we have great news in India. On the economic front, there was a lot of apprehension after the lockdown, what would happen. And it looks like we have normalized quite rapidly. Look at most indicators, barring few, we are somewhere between 90 to 100% in terms of economic activity. It has surprised us as well. We were fairly cautious when the lockdown happened. We thought the numbers have proved to be a lot better than what we anticipated. So even on the COVID front, as well as on the economic front, there is positive news for India. And it looks like we are poised at a very comfortable place. The index earnings went through a very sharp correction. Now we've had almost 6 years of very low earnings growth, primarily linked to problems within India, where there was a lot of excess capacity. Corporates were over leveraged and we were in a deleveraging cycle, and demand environment was very, very weak. After the COVID crisis hit and the lockdown was imposed, a lot of analysts sharply cut their estimates, and numbers, it looked like we would get back to almost 3 years previous earnings. So it could be that we could end up with FY18 or FY17 earnings. And there was a sharp deterioration. What we have seen in the most recent quarterly results is that numbers have surprised on the positive. So whatever the expectations that the analysts had set after the COVID crisis hit and after Q1 results, Q2 results have surprised on the upside. You are seeing corporates report higher earnings than what was estimated. And primarily it is linked to demand being slightly better and operating leverage kicking in, where corporates cut their cost quite dramatically. And you are seeing earnings being a lot better because of that. So if you see the earnings cycle, after a long time, you're seeing an uptick in earnings, consensus earnings relative to expectations. You've just had downward sloping curve for most of the years, but now it looks like you had an upgrade in earnings. And if this demand recovery sustains, we would not be surprised if that number moves up even further, because estimates were very, very low after Q1, after corporate earnings. So again, it is good news on the earnings front relative to expectations. And that is what is feeding into the market, where earnings have been a lot more positive than what people expected. On the COVID front, India seems a lot better positioned than its Western peers. And economic normalization seems to have happened a lot more quicker than what people expected. Hence, you're seeing a sharp rally in equity markets. So, of course, the markets are cheering. The Sensex, or the narrow index, which was just short of its all-time highs in October, has comfortably breached that. We are at all-time highs, and BSE 200 had already breached its all-time highs. Not all-time highs, but previous highs, which we saw in the month of Jan, has breached those highs. And we are again comfortably poised to hit new record highs in the month of November. So again, markets have factored a lot of the good news, and we are rallying quite strongly. Of course, valuations are showing that the markets are expensive. You have to be careful there, because this is a trailing number. And what has happened is, because in the Q1 you had a lockdown imposed hit on earnings, where most of the earnings were down 50-60%. If you take a trailing EPS number and calculate the P multiple, it would suggest that it's very expensive. But even adjusted for that, markets are expensive. So if you go back to FY20 earnings and you plot the multiple for that, we are somewhere close to 25, 26 times of that, which is much higher than the long-term average. So it's not that valuations are cheap, but because there is good news on some economy and earnings front, markets are getting in a euphoric phase, as well as on flows. We are getting very strong flows in the market. So at least despite that sharp drop down that we saw in the month of March, where almost $8 billion of FII selling happened, we are seeing a strong comeback. So YTD, we are still positive. And in the month of November, which is not there, you are seeing total flows surpass what we've seen for the entire calendar year. So we might end up $7 billion of net inflows just in the month of November. So India is attracting very strong flows, primarily linked to these three factors that I've suggested. Good news on the COVID front, good news on the earnings front, and one of the few economies that is standing out, and you could have a very strong rebound in FY22, which is what is driving all this FI activity. Local flows have been moderate. We are seeing a lot of investors booking profits at the levels that markets have seen. Now, what has happened is people who have come in 2017, 18, and 19 at much higher levels, they were fairly heartbroken after the strong correction, and they were seeing large M2M losses on their investments. And once market has recovered and people have got back to the original investment value, we are seeing some profit booking happening, or at least people taking out some of the money that they've invested out of relief. So local activity has been slightly weak, but it will come back. If the markets continue to rally, you will see a lot more local investors coming in, and we expect FI activities to remain strong. Again, one of the big things that has happened is we are in an unprecedented zone in terms of money printing, central bank money printing, especially given that there were lockdowns everywhere. So most central bankers have used fiscal policy as well as monetary policy to transfer money into the hands of say, borrowers or into individual say, buyers or investors. Now, what this amount of money printing does is it pushes down the required rate of return. So in a normalized environment, if I wanted, say, a return of X%, in an environment where money is freely available, that return gets pushed lower. So it encourages risky behavior. So if I was from equities, if I required a certain amount of return, say X, now my return will be a lot lower, given that alternate asset classes are priced a lot lower. So if risk-free rate of return goes lower, my requirement for equity also moves lower. So that is what pushes up price to earnings multiples, and we are in that environment. At least internally, our view is perhaps that environment might sustain for a while. Central bankers are in no mood to pull back the liquidity that they've put in. At least some of the central bankers, including the US, have suggested liquidity will be fairly easy for the next 3 years. So you might have to just factor low interest rates and high PE multiples for a prolonged period of time. Again, the economic setback that India saw after COVID, our sense is we will get back to a normalized environment. And when we looked at data after the Lehman collapse, which was perhaps a similar kind of event, which had a huge setback on Western markets in terms of demand and very low interest rates and easy liquidity environment, India was not impacted at all, and we continue to grow. So our sense is once things normalize and sort of things settle down and things open up, India will get back. And the primary reason is we are underpenetrated in each of these categories. There is a long way headway for us to catch up to even the emerging markets. Forget about developed markets. And given that we continue to urbanize and continue to add people in the middle class, we will continue to grow. The growth rate could be slightly moderated compared to what we've seen over the last decade or before that, but we will grow. There is no question that we will not grow. And relative to others, it is fairly attractive. Now, the reason why a lot of this money comes to India is Western markets perhaps may not grow or grow very, very slowly after this setback. And in that environment, if you see an economy growing even at 5-6%, it is very attractive for foreign investors, given that cost of money is very, very cheap. So again, our sense is we will get back to the long-term GDP assumption. Perhaps after you adjust for FY21 and 22, where FY21 there will be a sharp contraction, and FY22 there'll be a sharp rebound. We will perhaps grow between 5 and 6% between FY23 and 25. That will perhaps be the timeline required for us to absorb a lot of the excess capacity that is there in the system, for corporates to then start the next leg of capex. But in a relative world, perhaps that will be good enough for us to attract flows and for people to price Indian equities at a much higher multiple than what we've seen historically. We again, our sense is we will get back to 6.5% long-term GDP growth, but it might take some time. But we continue to remain bullish on the longer-term outlook. Near term, it looks like we perhaps have created a bottom in Q1, and the rebound has been fairly attractive. And we will perhaps, at least our internal view is FY21 could be a minus 10% kind of GDP year, which Pankaj will cover. And then next year again could be a rebound of plus 10%, and we get back to our FY20 numbers in GDP growth. So in terms of how we've positioned the portfolio, again, our view was in an uncertain environment, we want to stick to quality. So when the markets corrected and valuations were very attractive, we went ahead and added quality stocks where we felt that management was highly capable, valuations were attractive, and in a stressful environment, they had a balance sheet quality to last at a lockdown of 6 to 8 months. So our number of portfolio stocks went up by 4 or 5 in that period of March and April. Our weight right now is higher in financials and consumer discretionary because that is where we felt valuations were the cheapest. In terms of stress test, most of the stocks that we saw, barring a couple of names where the promoter remains still fairly strong, have very strong liquidity to last a lockdown, be it first wave or the second wave. And we continue to add to the portfolio. So, I mean, the portfolio is positioned for an economic recovery, and we think a larger weight in financials and consumer discretionary will do well if the economy rebounds strongly. So, our performance after the lockdown, after the rebound started, has been fairly good. And so last year we had a tough time because it was a very concentrated rally. We did not own certain stocks in the index heavyweights. But this year we have been able to keep pace with the benchmark and in some instances and marginally outperform it as well. The last 3 months have been fantastic, where a lot of these cyclicals that we have done really well for us. In terms of how should investors be positioned, again, the data is positive. Economic normalization has happened faster than anticipated. We are at sort of a multi-decade low in interest rates, and it will be a very, very strong catalyst in reviving demand. So our sense is demand will continue to move higher. And in that environment, it is unlikely that we will see any sharp correction in equities. We expect India to be far better positioned relative to its Western peers in terms of growth outlook. So we will draw a lot of foreign flows in India. So, I mean, we are a very conservative set of investors, but just the way data has played out. So between 2013 to 2020, you had declining GDP growth and declining earnings, but valuations were very higher. But going forward, our sense is earnings could pick up, and hence high valuation multiples might sustain. So our advice to investors is now is not the time to book profits. Stay invested. You could have a very prolonged rally if this demand environment sustains, and we are tilting towards perhaps that demand environment sustaining. The only risk to our thesis is if we get into a large second wave and the vaccine news turns out not to be that positive, then again you will have a sell-off globally in equities as well as in India, and valuations will moderate returns. So even the valuations might sustain, but whatever you've seen over the last 6 to 8 months, you will have to moderate your return expectations purely because current multiples are already high. So that is our view for investor positioning. That is sort of the end of my equity outlook. I will hand over to Pankaj to take over for the fixed income outlook.
Thank you, Nilesh. And once again, I thank you all for joining in. And before I go into the fixed income outlook, just give a brief how fixed income funds generate return and what are the factors that drive those returns. So first, there are two major factors. One is the interest accrual. So these debt funds, they invest into debt securities, which are nothing but loan to companies or to government, like that. And they get some interest on that loan. So that is one component of your return. The other component is change in the price of those bonds or the debt securities. So like normal loan is not traded, but these debt securities, the bonds or the CPs, CDs, all these instruments are actively traded in the market, like shares, and their prices move up and down. So accordingly, you see changes in the NAV of those schemes. So these are the two major components through which debt schemes generate returns. And one more thing to understand is the longer maturity bonds or the longer duration debt funds, they are more sensitive to interest rate changes. That means the price component, the return coming from the movement in price, is slightly higher compared to the interest accrual. So that's one more thing we need to understand before I go into the outlook, because I'll be using this as a basis for in many of the slides. Next slide, please. Please move to next slide. Next slide, please.
Apologies, Pankaj. It's just moving. I don't know why it's not. Just give me 1 second.
Yes. So this is the chart of 10-year bond yield, 10-year benchmark government bond yield in India. And you can see this is a fairly long chart of almost 18 years. And you can see there has been a broad range where yields have been trading. So from 2002 to 2014-15, where we have seen yields ranging between 5 to 9%. That 5-year bottom has happened a long back, decade back. But after 2015, the few things happened. One, the market has actually widened, the debt market. And secondly, the RBI's role of targeting inflation, that has changed. So that inflation targeting became a formal mandate, and that kind of changed the working of the RBI in terms of how they target inflation and try to balance out growth and inflation. So since then, we have seen yields ranging between at much lower band, actually at 6 to 8%. And now for very long, after very long time, we have seen the 10-year bond yield below 6%. And it's been holding here for almost 2 months now, very close to that level, but slightly lower than 6%. But if you see the past record, yields have not sustained below 6% for a very long time. We have seen a sharp rebound in every occasion when yields have dipped below 6%. But what it means for debt investors. So if you see the chart at the right-hand side, you can see that yields have been coming down for the last 2 years. And that is get reflected in the returns of long duration funds. So if you look at returns of gilt fund or the long duration fund or the dynamic bond fund, most of them are posting close to double-digit kind of return for the last 2 years. But whether that can sustain, that is one point we have to see, because accordingly investors have to taper their expectations. So one thing, we have to consider this possibility that yields can bounce back. In past, they have not sustained below 6%. And then we look at all other factors, whether this time is different or we can again see the similar rebound. Next slide, please. Please move to next slide, Nilesh. Next slide, please. Okay, just to continue that. So measure what actually drives yield now at this point. So broadly, you can say two major factors which actually drive yields: inflation and government's fiscal balances. Because when I say fiscal balances, that means government's their fiscal deficit, which is nothing but difference between their income and the expenditures. So over the period, we have seen government is keeping very high fiscal deficit, and they've been funding that through market borrowing. So they issue bonds in the market. Thank you. So now they issue government bonds, and more bonds they issue, that create pressure on bond yields. So that is one part. The other major factor which actually drive yield is inflation, which actually sets kind of basis for interest rate. When RBI sets interest rates, as you know, they are inflation targeting central bank. This is the biggest factor they look at while setting interest rates. So these are the two major factors, two major macroeconomic factor or fundamental factors which drive bond yields. But apart from that, there are demand supply points at various maturities and various points on the bond yield curve. And as I mentioned, that yields may not sustain below 6% for a very long time. That is one possibility. So investors who are looking for investing in long duration funds, maybe they have to consider it as a risk, and at some point it can actually hurt them if yields move up. So one alternative is you can move down on the curve and invest in short duration funds, very short maturity funds. But the choice is not that simple. If you look at the yield curve, so this chart actually shows the yield curve. Yield curve means that yield at various maturity points. So you can see at the bottom axis that as you move from left to right, maturity of the bond is increasing. So you can see that at the lower end, at very short term, up to 1 year maturity bonds, your yield offered is close to 3.5. And at the longer end, you can see still you can easily get that closer to 6% kind of yield. And as I mentioned, that this is one of the major component of your return in the debt fund. So as if you are investing in very short tenure bonds at this moment or short duration funds, you are effectively earning lower accrual. So as I said that, again, the choice is not that simple, because here you are losing an accrual, and at higher maturity, you are taking more risk in terms of your duration position. So what should we do? Before going into that, let's look at these two fundamental factors, that inflation and the fiscal, how it can pan out, and how the environment for debt investment will shape up. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is one of the factors, that fiscal deficit, nothing but the difference between the government's income and the expenditure. And most part of this fiscal deficit is funded by market borrowing. So if fiscal deficit is rising, means government have to borrow more from the market. And when they borrow more, yields tend to rise. So as you can see in the chart, that for many years, the combined fiscal deficit, so the blue bar actually shows the fiscal deficit for the central government, and the orange is for states combined. So for many years, it has been between 6 to 8%, the combined fiscal deficit. For this year, we have seen a sharp jump. Even in the last year, FY20, you can see it touching 8%. For FY21, it can be well above 12%, and the consolidation could be actually slow. So we expect a very gradual kind of consolidation. So overall this fiscal deficit would come down, but at a very slow pace. So for many years going forward, for next 2-3 years, probably government will have to borrow more from the market, and when they borrow more, actually put pressure on long-term bond yields. But the question arises that even if we have seen this kind of jump in fiscal deficit in FY20 and FY21, why yields are at multi-year low? So one major reason for this is buying from RBI. So RBI has been buying government bonds aggressively, both center and state, just to keep bond yields at lower level. So they have been doing everything to protect yields from rising, and that's the major comfort in the longer duration fund. So that can answer one of your question, whether we can position in the long duration fund, where we see yields are already at very low levels. So RBI is active, and they have been very explicit that they are going to intervene in the market to keep yields at lower level. So we can go by that the longer term yields may remain anchored by RBI buying. Next slide, please. So other component is inflation, which actually, again, if you see for the last many months, inflation has been above the RBI's threshold. So you have been reading from newspapers and everywhere that overall inflation is close to 7% or higher than that in the recent months. But what actually driving that inflation? So this is a breakup of inflation. That blue line actually shows the inflation in food items. Food items are almost 45% of our inflation basket. And the orange line actually shows the core inflation, which can be the under inflationary pressure. And the band, the dotted lines, it actually shows the RBI's threshold level. So RBI target to keep inflation between 2 and 4%, 2 and 6%, sorry. And you can see the core inflation has been in this band and it is sustaining in this band. But food prices have been pretty high for last many months. And that's the reason why we see inflation at very high levels. But if you see RBI's actions, RBI has been completely ignoring this inflation, because much of it is because of supply chain disruption or destruction of some crops because of unseasonal rains, which may not sustain for very long. And expectation is that food inflation will come down in next few quarters, which will bring inflation down within the RBI's tolerance band. So as of now, we expect inflation to cool down, and it's not the historical inflation that matters. It's actually the forward-looking. So what's going to happen next is the most important part. And for the next year, the base will be very favorable. So this year we had very high inflation that will lead to slightly lower inflation on next year. So again, RBI can remain accommodative. In the last policy, RBI has given guidance that forward guidance that they will remain accommodative for this year and the next year. That means there won't be any rate hike. They will look out for possibility of rate cut until unless they change this stance. So we can always consider this possibility that RBI can go back and change its stance. But right now, the picture is that RBI is accommodative. They have been intervening in bond market to buy bond so that the fiscal deficit is not that much of a worry. And even if we don't have any rate cut, RBI's bond buying can keep a lid on the longer term bonds. So that's on the fundamental side. But another part is the demand supply and how that will pan out. So before going into that, next slide, please. Okay.
Just 1 second, Pankaj. It's just moving slowly.
So just to summarize once again that on fiscal, it's not a worry till the time RBI is financing it. RBI is buying those bonds and not hurting the market. On the monetary policy, given the inflation scenario, there is a possibility that we don't get any more rate cut, but we do not see any possibility of rate hike as of now. So, overall, picture is kind of RBI will remain accommodative for longer period, which will keep even long-term yields contained. Das put is, as I mentioned, that RBI has been buying bonds. So it's named after Shaktikanta Das, who is governor of Reserve Bank, that whenever bond yields move up, RBI come in and buy those bonds. So if you are buying long-term bonds, you can take all the gains when yields go down, but when yields move up, RBI come in and buy those bonds. So that is kind of Das put, which is keeping yields at lower level despite such an unprecedented jump in fiscal deficit. And globally, if you see that environment, the demand supply environment for bonds is very favorable. Across the globe, most of the central banks are buying bonds, all kind of bonds, and most of them have reduced their policy rates to zero or many cases below zero. So that zero rate environment globally, that actually can put more demand for Indian bonds, which are still yielding something, and that spread between the Indian bonds and the US Treasury has actually widened. So that spread is still very attractive. So there could be yield hunting from global investors. On top of that, we have you must have heard from various sources that government has been pushing for including inclusion of Indian bonds into global bond index. So like equities, where we have ETF chasing investing into index, there are global investors who just follow and replicate the index, and so this inclusion can actually lead to a good amount of capital inflows into Indian government bonds. Currently, the sense is that there will be some positive development by the mid of next year, mid of 2021. So we have to wait and see. Overall demand situation looks favorable at this moment. But again, we have to be very careful about the risk at the horizon. As I mentioned, that fiscal health is not good. Our debt levels, debt to GDP, has actually jumped past almost 90%. So we have to be very careful on those fronts. These are the two major risks which can actually materialize if RBI stop buying those bonds. So in this kind of environment where we have very low rate at the short end and at the longer end, though as of now things look contained, but there are risks, and if they materialize, that the reversal could be very sharp. In my opinion, I think dynamic bond funds are a good option, where the fund manager had the flexibility to manage these kind of risk and accordingly change the portfolio when things change. So that's all on the dynamic on the fixed income side. Just one more thing, when interest rates fall, actually many of the investors, they actually look at overall asset allocation. So I think going in the further presentation, you can hear about that. So with that note, I'll pass on to Chirag, who will take you through gold. So, Chirag.
Sure. Thank you, Pankaj. So we'll start with something on the global front, how things are shaping up, and therefore the outlook for gold. And further, we'll run into how you could look at your portfolio allocation at this point in time. Right. Next slide, please, Nilesh. As Nilesh has said, much of the Western world is going through a second wave of the pandemic, and virus is resurging again. The cases are increasing overall. And what happened because of lockdowns, because of loss of activity overall globally, if you see the left-hand side of the chart, there was a big decline in economic activity, and most of the composite indicators out there had taken a big toll. The way the different indicators that kind of lead or are leading indicators of the economy were showing a significant drop. From the lows, we have improved. And any improvement for everyone will look like a V-shape, because the depth of decline that we had seen in the economic activity was so severe that rebound that we will see initially will always look like a V-shaped rebound. And given the amount of money the central banks have pumped in, it will have to show somewhere in the economic activities. So we are not out of the woods as yet. It's still a long way out there, but there has been an improvement. So we'll have to wait and see how this second wave of virus or the vaccine promises that we have got from 3 companies, how they shape up over time and therefore bring about improvement in economic activity, or there is further slowing down or gradual improvement on economic activity that we will see. That we'll come to know in next few months or in next 1 year's time frame. But so far, it's been a good recovery, but from now on, if there is no support from stimulus or governments, it's going to take its own time to recover back to the normalized levels. Like on the chart on the right-hand side shows, the amount of jobs lost in the US is usually tells us how much longer it's going to take for the economy to recover, right? So if you see the job losses in 2020 because of COVID, was significantly larger than any time we have seen, more than double what we have seen ever in the past, right? Even in the 2008 crisis, it was less than half of what we have seen this time. Last crisis, the 2008 crisis, took about 7 years for the economy to recover and come back to the normal level, which was prevailing before the global financial crisis. So this time, given the amplitude or the magnitude was much larger, it's going to take more time to achieve the full recovery that we all are hoping for. World Bank chief said that it will take at least 5 years for the economy to come back to the levels that we had seen before COVID. So it is going to take time, but the recovery is promising. But from now on here, it will depend on how the governments and the central banks support the economy. And the fast pace that we have seen will continue, or we will be into a gradual returning back of the economy over years. Next slide, please. When it comes to gold, we've communicated before in our webinars and in our writing and told you that whenever there is a news on vaccine, we will see a knee-jerk reaction in gold prices. And exactly that has happened. As the vaccine news came out, gold prices were down by about $100 immediately on that news, right? So, so that was as expected, on expected lines. And we think that the impact of the vaccine news has been overestimated on gold prices. There are still, as we have seen in the previous charts, still there is a long way for the economy to recover. There is still a lot of support that the economy will require for it to kind of gradually improve going forward. So there will be monetary action, there will be fiscal action, and both these tend to impact gold and positively impact gold. So the vaccine will not undo the damage that we have seen. It's still a long way to recovery, and the actions that will be taken for that recovery to fasten pace will lead to a benefit to gold. We'll see how in the next slides. Next slide, please. So if you see, people are saying that the stimulus was expected. Trump was pushing for the stimulus. There was a political gridlock in the US, and the stimulus got delayed, right? People were just debating whether it's going to be $2 trillion or $3 trillion, but people were sure about the stimulus. But given the gridlock, it has got postponed, but we don't think it's got derailed. Economy is still not out of the woods. It will still require a lot of support from the governments and the central banks. Like in the 2008 crisis, which was just a global financial crisis, it took about $2.6 trillion for the as a support from the central banks and the governments. If you see this time around, it's already done 7.2 trillions, and I think more will be there. So whatever run up that we have seen in gold prices is on back of the debasement that we have seen because of a lot of money printing by the central banks, and it's going to continue going forward as well. What will happen? US has been at the forefront of the stimulus. They have done much more than any other central banks. They will continue as the Biden administration comes in and tries to support the weakening economy. it is going to improve. So overall, what we are saying is that 7.2 trillion we have already seen. We will see more going in the future, which will lead to more deficits run by the governments, and the deficits will be met by printing of money by the central banks. Because if you see, central banks are those who are buying the debt currently. There is no external investor, there is no foreign investor coming and buying such huge amounts of debt. It is the central bank saying, don't worry, I will come and buy your debt to the governments of those countries. So, so we will expect more of this going forward. Next slide, please. So as we have seen that there has been significant amount of asset purchases by these central banks to help the governments run those deficits. What does this do? This printing of money leads to two things. One is interest rates are being lowered by them. That leads to a negative interest rates, which means that given the amount of money being pumped in, there is going to be a bout of inflation out there. We are already seeing commodity prices go up. Like if you see, the copper prices are at a 7-year high. Many of the commodity prices are at multi-year highs. So the commodity prices are already shooting up, right? Given the liquidity that is there in the global economy. So this printing of money will keep inflation high. The interest rates will be kept suppressed by the central banks. So what you have is, if you were to look at an equation of interest rates minus inflation, which we call as real interest rates, is running negative. And given the pledges by these central banks that we will continue to keep rates low for a longer period of time, that will ensure that the rates remain negative on a real basis for a fairly long amount of time. So what these fixed income instruments holders are saying, that if I stay in a fixed income instrument, I am going to lose because inflation is running higher than the interest that I'm receiving on my investment. Therefore, it doesn't make sense for me to be in this fixed income instruments. Therefore, to some extent for safety, it's okay, I can park some money there. But beyond that, I need to move into instruments that protect my purchasing power. And those instruments are like gold. So you will see a lot of money chasing yields in equities, a lot of money moving into gold for protecting their purchasing power. So you should expect that as central banks continue to do the same thing again and again, keep interest rates low, keep on printing more money, and increase the chances of high inflation running around, you will see a lot of money moving to assets like equities and gold. Next slide, please. So this is the chart time and again when we say that negative real interest rates, that is interest rates minus inflation, is lower to negative, gold does well. And time and again we have seen that, be it the 1970s bull market in gold, 1975 to 80, or be it the bull market that we'd seen post the global financial crisis. Each time we had interest rates kept low by the central banks, and the real interest rates were running low to negative. Therefore, investors said it doesn't make sense, and therefore they moved into assets like gold. So you see a huge amount of investment flows chase assets like gold. That is what we have seen this year as well. Given that this negative to low real interest rates going to stay for longer, gold prices are expected to do better. Also, one thing is gold is currently under-owned. If you see, gold as an allocation from the global pool of capital that lies globally is just about 2.5%. So that says that even a small shift from these assets like fixed income, which are yielding negative returns to investors, if there is a small shift also into gold, it could lead to much higher gold prices. People generally ask us, gold has corrected from the top. Was it a bubble? Is it going to fall further? So this is a crude way to explain that gold is a monetary asset. The value of gold will inch higher with the increase in amount of currency that has been printed by the central banks. So this is a US money supply increase, or how the US money supply has grown over periods of time, and how the gold prices have gone along with it. So if you were to see the last bull market, right, before in the 2005-6 period, gold was significantly undervalued as compared to the amount of money that was printed, right? And when the 2008 crisis happened, people thought that central banks are printing money and it was going to be inflationary. So it's better to be in gold. So there was a lot of investments flowing into gold, and gold went up significantly, right? And if you see, the money supply increase was not as high as what people were anticipating. So gold fell, and as money supply didn't keep pace, other assets started doing well, and therefore gold prices had to correct because it was significantly higher than the money supply trend line that we have seen, right? So, but now if you see, the increase in money supply has been as a vertical line, if you see at the fag end of the chart, and gold prices have now caught pace with the money supply increases. And as we expect more stimulus from these governments, more money printing by the central banks, it is natural that gold prices will clinch along with it and move higher. So if you ask by this chart, gold prices at this juncture, based on what the governments and central banks have done, is slightly below, it had shot up, but now it's slightly below the money supply trend line that it chases. But if you see, if it kind of keeps moving higher, if the governments continue to do what they have done, gold prices should inch higher. So, and this is a different world. There is a lot more debt and deficits running around as compared to what we have seen it previously. So I think there is much more support for gold. And I think gold prices, given these factors, it should be a support for gold prices. So overall, we've discussed the three asset classes, the equity, debt, and gold, and how there are various uncertainties, there are certain risks lingering out there. What you should do. Equity is at all-time high. Should you sell? Should you buy? Gold has corrected from the top. Should you buy or should you move out? So remember one thing, that each asset in your portfolio is there for a reason, right? Equity is there for long-term growth. Gold is like a hedge against your macro events and acts as a store of value. And fixed income is a regular income and for stability of your portfolio. So you cannot abandon any of the asset class. You have to stay invested in all three. And each asset class will play a role in your portfolio. You can think, you change the allocations, but you need to stay invested in all three. Like predicting the next best asset class is very, very difficult, which you can see from this chart. There are various periods when gold does well, some periods when bond does well, and some periods when gold does well. So you have to spread your assets in each of the asset class. Predicting which asset class will do the best next year is very, very difficult. No one predicted COVID. COVID came, there were significant losses to equities. So you need to there, but you can increase or decrease your allocation based on certain parameters. Next chart. Always we have seen there is a lot of emotion that drives your decision making. There are biases that you think that equity markets at all-time high will not go further from here, and therefore you should sell out of it, right? There are market cycles that each one has to understand, but be invested in them. Given the run-up that we have seen in equity markets, it is prudent to reduce some of your allocation there, but it doesn't, given that there are various factors, your liquidity driving around, earnings picking up. So you need to have certain portion in equities, which is for your long-term growth, but you can lower some of your allocation given that valuations are high. So you need to balance both the factors, what has already happened and what is about to happen, right? Next chart. And have a balanced allocation, right? This is very, very important. You might think that equity is the best asset class out there. I should be in there for long-term growth, but to surprise of many, gold over long time frame from 2004 to 2020 is still done equally good as compared to what equities have done, right? So should you have gold? Yes, of course you should have gold, but a mixed allocation always helps. So this is, if you see the equity plus debt plus gold is a 40 equity, 40 debt and 20 gold portfolio, right? What it has done, it has given slightly lower return than what gold and equities have done, right? But still not really not significantly lower that you cannot look at it. It's 11.6 in equities versus 10.4 in the balanced allocation. But importantly, what it has done, it has lowered your volatility of returns. Like equity, if you're in equity had a volatility variability of returns, which is about 22%. whereas this combination would have had variability of 9.5%. So it gives you much smoother investing experience, right? Why? Because there are times where equity does well, and there are times when equity doesn't do well. Other assets like debt and gold do well. So it really helps you in an asset allocation framework that you kind of achieve a similar kind of return, but at a much lower risk. If you were in equities, the biggest drawdown that we saw in 2008, markets fell by 56%, right? Whereas if you had a balanced portfolio of equity, debt, and gold, you would have only fallen by 21%, right? So much lower downside. You get the downside protection, you get that predictability given the variation in returns is lesser, and you get better returns. So don't go for the next best asset class. Have an allocation to all asset classes is very, very important. As I said, the allocation percentages may change depending on how you view each asset classes, but you need to stay in all three asset classes. Next slide. This really shows you how the impact of that sell-off that happened. If you were just an equity investor in the quarter from Jan to March, you would have fallen because of the fall in March by 28%. If you had a 40-40-20 portfolio of equity, debt, and gold, you would have only fallen by 8%. So rather than pure equity allocations, you need to have a balanced allocation, and that helps you to sleep peacefully at night. Next slide, please. So we also have a multi-asset fund. This is just to give you an example of how we do it. If you see, before COVID, our allocation was significantly lower at 27%. As markets fell during COVID, we increased our allocation because equities became reasonably priced at that time. And we increased our allocation to 50%. And as markets have run up, we have again lowered our allocation to 30%. So you can change your allocation. Either you can do it on your own, or you could park your money in a multi-asset kind of fund, and therefore you can reap the benefit in terms of the fund manager taking the broad calls for you, depending on how he sees each of the asset class shaping up, how the valuations in each asset class shaping up. And each point, what we try to do in this fund is try to lower your risk. Whenever we think that the risk is high, we will refrain from taking that call. And whenever there is lower risk and valuations and everything is supportive, we will go into that asset class, right? So, so a dynamic allocation always helps you to take advantage of the market cycles that you see, and therefore gives you a kind of a steady approach in terms of making your allocation calls. So if you think that either you use these kind of solutions that you have, like a multi-asset fund, to kind of get that return, what we endeavor in our multi-asset fund is give you returns that are better than your fixed deposits, but at the same time, we ensure that you don't take overt risk to get to that kind of return. So if you see the standard deviation or a variability of our multi-asset fund has been about 6 to 7%. So we have taken, it showcases that there is slightly higher risk, but when the markets fell, it kind of protected the downsides on a relative basis. If you think that all this is complex and you need to do it something on your own, which is very, very simple, then this is something that can come to your rescue in terms of what you could do is have a very simple approach, have about 12 to 24 months of your expenses, of your monthly expenses, into a very safe place. Could be your bank account, could be a liquid fund, or could be something like a multi-asset fund. And whatever remaining, you could split 80-20. You could have a split of 80% into equities and 20% in gold. This has worked really well. We have seen many people, including Ajit, use this allocation, and it has worked wonderfully well over long time frames. So if you think that everything else is complex, I think a solution could be much better way to go about it. But if you think even that's complex, then you could use a simple structure like this to make your own allocation in terms of 12 to 24 months in a very safe place, and rest of the money that you have can be split into 80 and 20. So this could be one way out. So thank you very much. We've given you an outlook on all three asset classes and the multi-asset, how we can build your portfolio. We will be happy to take any questions.
Yes, well, thank you, Chirag, Pankaj, and Nilesh for the insightful update and outlook on the asset classes. Hope you're ready to take some questions now. We have loads of them coming in. I will start with Nilesh. Nilesh, is the market high sustainable, or are we expecting any major long-term corrections?
Yeah, I mean, we would have been worried if the earning cycle was trending lower and the markets trending higher, which is what, if you heard us say a year ago, that is what was happening in India, where the earning cycle was moving lower and the markets kept on rising, and we were very conservative. It looks like the earning cycle has hit a bottom and turned around. So it's very tough to imagine that if the earning cycle is picking up, markets will have a very sharp correction. So our sense is there could be some correction in the market because valuations have overextended, but it's unlikely that it'll be a very sharp correction, especially in an environment where money is so easily available. Kind of the charts that me and Chirag showed where central bankers have been printing money. The cost of alternatives is very, very low. So to beat a threshold of a fixed income return at that low rates becomes very easy for equity. So at least my sense is corrections would be rare. I do not expect any major sharp correction unless, like I said, COVID again takes off in a big way and the world shuts down. But if that doesn't happen, it looks like, especially in India, you have hit a earnings cycle bottom, and earnings cycle is going to pick up for the next few years. And you will perhaps have a moderate return from equities, but returns will be positive.
Sure. Pankaj, what will be the effect of the upcoming interest rate environment on returns of GSEC funds?
Sorry, Gal, can you come up again?
Yeah, sure. What will be the effect of the upcoming interest rate environment on the returns of GSEC funds?
So it depends on what kind of GSEC fund we are looking at, whether it's a long duration fund or the shorter duration funds. And currently, as I mentioned in my presentation, that yield curve is very steep. So if you are invested in shorter duration funds, your accrual will be much lower than compared to what you can get in the longer funds. But there we have a lot of volatility. So as I mentioned, that there is a lot of uncertainties in future. We don't know how whether RBI will keep on buying bonds for very long time. So if they don't, that can actually hurt GSEC yields. But as of now, it seems returns could be closer to the accrual level given yields are in a tight band, and given that RBI is buying, easily the longer duration funds can actually outperform the shorter durations.
Sure. Thanks, Pankaj. Chirag, the next question is for you. Can you tell us more about your multi-asset fund and its composition? And is it true that the fund hasn't given negative returns?
So the way we manage the fund, it's a very flexible and broad mandate for each asset class. It is not biased towards any asset classes. Like for equity, we have a range of 25 to 65. In that band, the equity allocation will move. For debt, we have similar band of 25-65, and for gold, we have a band of 10 to 20%. So that is broadly the ranges in which we will move. And we have principle-based allocation depending on valuation and relative factors of each of the asset classes. We will position the fund accordingly, right? So what we are trying to do, if any asset class becomes expensive, we will kind of try to lower the risk by moving out of that asset class, right? So as equities have now run up a lot, we have reduced our allocation from 50% to 30%. So we'll dynamically allocate. So if equities work to correct from here, we will again invest in equities. So we will make that broad calls. We will make the dynamic calls in terms of allocating to each of the asset classes. And in terms of returns, we say that anyone who's looking for fixed deposits over a 3-year period can look at this fund, right? Or any rolling 3-year period that we have seen so far in the history of the fund, it has never given a negative return on a 3-year basis. So it may have given negative return in terms of what time frame you are measuring, but any time frame above 3-year and above, it has not given a negative return. So if your horizon is 3 years, I think it is a better proposition to put in a multi-asset fund as opposed to your fixed deposits. You end up taking slightly higher risk, but at the same time, given the its allocation to multiple asset classes and negatively correlated asset classes, the risk reduces significantly. Therefore, volatility of the multi-asset fund has been closer to around 6-7%, whereas if you see for equity as an asset class, will be around 15 to 20%. So it kind of, you're taking some risk, but you're being rewarded for the small risk that you're taking. Given that fixed deposits will suggest that if you have a horizon of 3 years and plus, you could look at the multi-asset fund.
Oh, thanks. Nilesh, do you see an expansion of PE multiples with more foreign funds chasing Indian equities now compared to the previous decade?
The current P expansion, P multiple itself is an anomaly. Like I said, the current P multiple, which shows slightly upwards of 30 times, it was a trailing P multiple, because Q1 we had a lockdown and most corporates reported earnings which were down 60-70%. The trailing earnings number is suppressed, and even the Q2 numbers will be, of course, marginally lower than last year. So as these quarters move out next year, the trailing P numbers will suddenly show a contraction. Our sense is they're trading at somewhere close to 25 times FY20 earnings, which is perhaps a more stable number to look at. Can the P multiples expand even further? Yes, they can. Given the free money that is floating around, India can trade at a lot higher multiples, especially if growth rebounds very strongly next year. Given that in a relative world, India will stand out. If the Western world is reporting very low growth rates, India's high growth rates can attract a lot more funds and it can expand. So my answer is yes, they can expand. Whether that will happen, we'll have to wait and watch. But there is upsides to those P numbers if growth comes back in a strong way.
Sure. Pankaj, in light of the increasing fiscal deficit for FY21 and 22, is there a likelihood of interest rates increasing?
See, we cannot rule out, but if we see even now, government is borrowing a lot more than what they have been doing for last many years. But yields are at multi-year low. One of the reason is that central bank is absorbing much of that supply. So till the time RBI is absorbing that excess supply, it's not going to hurt the market. But if RBI withdraw from that, if RBI stop buying government bonds, then definitely this high fiscal deficit will push long-term bond yields higher, much higher.
Nilesh, what are your views in the pharma industry right now? Is it wise to invest into?
Yeah, again, pharma was one of those unloved sectors. So it was a darling of the market from, say, 2007 to 2016, when they had a stellar run. Most of these companies ended up becoming multi-baggers. And we did not have any of these stocks in our portfolio because we felt valuations were expensive and there were risks. After 2016 onwards, they started correcting quite sharply. After that sharp correction, adjusted for risk, we thought valuations were comfortable in this space. And we added a couple of names that we thought would come out of a lot of the regulatory challenges, but that were being thrown to them by the US FDA, as well as they had a very strong portfolio. Since then, these stocks have done really well. So this, especially after the COVID crisis hit, they have been one of the best performing sectors, and valuations are no longer cheap. So, these stocks will do well, but if your expectations is that they would give the kind of returns that they've given in the next 6 months, I will say no. I think you'll have to moderate your returns. But whether they give you decent equity returns over the next 3 to 5 years, compared to the long-term average of equity returns between 10 and 15% CAGR, I think they still can. So if you just moderate your return expectations and then invest, then perhaps pharma would not disappoint you. But if you have very high expectations of returns, like the kind of returns they've given the last 6 months, then perhaps you will be disappointed.
Pankaj, in light of the IL&FS and Franklin Templeton crisis, with safety in mind, how many debt funds should a retired person invest some, of about 1 to 5 crores in? How many funds should they be diversified in?
In case of this, for the last 2 years, what we have seen in the credit market is very different story, and it turned out that this diversification may not work well, especially in a situation when we have a systematic shock to that entire market. So in case of credit, one thing we need to know that the biggest risk is contagion, that one default can lead to a chain reaction, and that can weaken the entire portfolio. That has happened after IL&FS. When IL&FS defaulted, if you remember the time just before the IL&FS, everything was going phenomenally well for the NBFC sector in the equity market and in the debt market. But suddenly things turned, and entire NBFC sector came into that critical zone. And we have since then we've seen a lot of defaults happening in that sector and many other sectors. So you see this contagion risk panning out whenever we see kind of shock in the credit market. So we have to be very careful about the credit risk. For retired person or investors who have low risk appetite, it's better to avoid taking much of credit risk. See, banks have very different approach when they do credit, and retail investors, I don't think that they are mentally prepared to take that kind of risk. So it's better to be in the safer debt options rather than hunting for credit and diversifying it by buying various credit funds.
Sure. I think Chirag is back. So I'll just repeat the question for the investors' benefit. Because multi-asset fund is a fund of fund, does the investor have to shell out multiple exit loads? Chirag, your comments on this, please.
Yeah, so it's not the multiple, how it actually works is, like I said, for the multi-asset fund, you don't have the exit load beyond a certain small period. When we buy, we pool the investments, right, in the fund. When we buy the long-term equity fund, for example, we have had investments from a fairly long time. And therefore, even if we have to change allocation, for example, and move from equity to debt or gold, we will sell the existing investments that we have, right? So they are predated, and therefore there is no exit load out there. And whenever an investor redeems, we say if we have to sell from the equity fund, still again, there is going to be predated investment that we'll sell. So it's not necessary that your redemption will lead to us paying an exit load in the underlying fund. And therefore, it's very rare that you end up paying the exit load out there in the long-term equity fund as well. So there could be instances, or most instances, it could be a scenario where because either you have surpassed the 3-month period of the quantum multi-asset fund of funds, and quantum multi-asset fund having investments which are for a period that exceeds 2 years. So there could be periods where there are no exit loads at all.
Sure. Thanks, Chirag. Nilesh, with the markets at an all-time high, which sector is going to shine in the near future?
Yeah, again, because it's an economic recovery and you expect sectors strongly geared to an economic recovery, they will especially show some of the best rebounds in terms of numbers. And I expect share prices will follow that. Now, last few years, cyclicals did not have that a great time. And value investors like us who had purchased cyclicals because valuations had come off, saw their returns not being that great, especially last 3 years. It was a very select set of stocks which did really well in the index. Even though broadly we were in an economic decline, the markets were rallying because of the select set of stocks. But now our sense is there's going to be a broad-based economic recovery. So in that sense, sectors which are geared to economic recovery, be it financials, consumer discretionary, consumer durables, metals, these are the sectors, or even materials will do well. And at least our sense is they will outperform traditional defenses, be it FMs, consumer staples, or IT and pharma. So the way the market activity has panned out in the first few months after the crisis, sectors which were least impacted by COVID, they did really well. So IT sector, pharma sector did really well. But once things settled down and people started looking at economic data, over the last 3 months, cyclicals and stocks linked to economic recovery have taken over and they have done really well. And our sense is they will continue to do well. So if you ask me sectors where which will do well, banking and financial services, consumer discretionary, and commodities perhaps will do well. And that is where I think even the fund is positioned, quantum long-term equity value fund.
Yeah. Chirag, how would you position the multi-asset fund against the balanced funds of other AMCs?
Sure, that's a very good question. So if you see balanced fund are very differently constructed as compared to a multi-asset fund. Balanced fund are just two asset classes, equity and debt. And most of the balanced fund out there are either biased towards equity or debt. Most of the popular ones are biased towards equities. When I say biased, they have a minimum 65% allocation to equities. So even if the fund manager doesn't like the equity valuation, he thinks that equities are very expensively priced, still he cannot protect the downsides for you because they have to stay invested at least 65% into equities at any point in time. They cannot lower their allocation lower than 65%. So that is really restrictive in terms of, so what we call is they are kind of, these balanced funds are not balanced, they are unbalanced funds because they are not able to help investors in terms of lowering the risk when it really counts, right? So whereas a multi-asset fund, if you see, is spread across all three asset classes. Like if you see the quantum multi-asset fund has a broad flexible mandate, where I can go 25-65 into equities, right? So it's a pretty broad range that I can move in and out. And for debt also it is 25-65. Plus an allocation to gold is always helps because whenever we have seen, like this year when markets fell sharply during COVID, gold did really well this year. So overall, an allocation to gold has always helped portfolios. It is a kind of a very good diversifier. So multi-asset fund, according to me, will score a lot better than a balanced fund. Given that it has flexible structure, it can help you reduce risk when it really matters. And an allocation to gold really helps from a portfolio perspective.
Chirag, the AUM of the multi-asset fund is smaller relative to its peers. Does that increase the risk for the investor?
Not at all, because if today the size is lower, but if you had a bigger size, it will still be managed in the same manner that it is done now, because the underlying investments that it has significantly larger mandate capacities, right? So I have that flexibility that even if it close to 5,000 crores or 10,000 crores tomorrow, it still will be managed in the very same way it is done today, because the underlying funds, for example, the long-term equity fund, the Nifty fund, the ESG fund, the gold fund, the liquid funds can absorb much larger sums than it has currently. So overall, the size of the fund, even if it is were to increase exponentially, it still will be managed in the same manner. So the underlyings are liquid. Underlyings have more capacity to increase, and therefore there is no risk whether it is lower size or it increases in size. It still will be managed in the very same way. Even at a lower size, there are no issues in terms of for deploying the cash or redeeming the underlying investments. So I don't anticipate any risk from the size perspective, even if it is smaller size or even if it increases in size.
Thanks, Chirag. Coming to you, Pankaj, if gilt rates remain low, will the FII inflows in debt slow down, leading to sluggish returns?
So it also depends on what kind of return they are getting in their domestic currency. So if you look at most of the developed countries where a large capital pool actually lies, their yields are much lower than what we get in India. So it depends on the spread, what spread you get over the treasuries or the euro bonds or other DM currencies. That actually matters more. And now if you see that yield spreads are much better, they have actually improved. And most of the developed world is actually now dealing with zero yield on their bonds. So definitely there is attractiveness in case of India. So I don't think that current low yields on Indian bonds is any kind of hamper for FPI flows.
Sure. Thanks, Pankaj. Nilesh, does it make sense to sell now due to high valuations and buy after a few months again?
No, like I said in my presentation, I think that would be an incorrect strategy. I think perhaps given that the economic cycle has turned, I think earning cycles has bottomed out. Just trying to time the market perhaps is not a great idea. I think people who did that in 2003-4, I'm not saying you will have that kind of rally, but again, because 2004 was a great year and people thought it will be a good time to sell, regretted later on in 2005 and 6. So I think it's better to stay invested. I don't think there are that many negatives on the horizon to drive a sharp correction, nor do I think central bankers are in a hurry to withdraw liquidity. As long as these two variables remain, and if earning cycles continue to move up, I think valuations will stay elevated and will reflect earnings growth over the next few years. So perhaps just staying invested makes sense right now.
Great. Chirag, with so much money being printed, why are gold and silver prices falling from their all-time highs in August and September?
Yeah, so it's largely based on optimism overall and a move towards risk assets. Whenever, because of the news of vaccine that was recent, gold sharply fell, right? So that has led to some, because that is because of the optimism that we're seeing, and people are moving towards risk assets and saying that they don't need safe haven assets because things are looking better going forward. But they are ignoring the fundamental factors that drive gold, which is largely the central bank policy action, the government fiscal action. So that is what will drive gold going forward. And from all these factors, there are still no signs of letting off. See, each asset cannot keep going up in a straight line. There will always be phases of moving up and correcting. So this is just that phase when some people, some speculative flows that would have come in because gold was in a momentum. Given this news, they are the first ones to sell. So if you see on the global ETFs, there was a sharp selling from certain types of investors. I think last month on a monthly basis, we saw the biggest decline in terms of selling that had happened. So overall, I think it is more towards this phase of saying that vaccine has come out. All those momentum guys are getting off the board. And if you see what was not happening so far is the consumption demand. Like consumption demand in India has really shot up right now, given the prices have corrected below 50,000 rupees. So everyone who were not buyers of gold on the consumption side, given that marriages also have started taking place, there is the consumption demand which is significantly improved than what we were seeing over the last 6 months. So overall, from a demand supply or from a factors that drive gold prices, not much has changed. But of course, when any asset that gold had a significant rally this year, it's more than about 30% around that level. So all those who had gotten because of the fear trade are kind of booking profits because the vaccine news is out. So there will be corrections, but I think these corrections are an opportunity to build your allocation. So if you don't have an allocation to gold, I will suggest that have a 10 to 15% allocation to gold at all times. And this could be a time when you kind of build that allocation.
So Chirag, what would you say is the best way to buy gold or own gold?
So I think traditionally we all have been buyers of physical gold, but given now there are efficient forms available which help you, which are better at price, which are better at liquidity, which are better at purity in terms of purity. So you should shift from physical, at least as far as your investments are concerned, shift from physical to these forms. And within these forms, I think each form has its merit and demerit. So if you're looking just for returns, then sovereign gold bonds could be thing. But always remember that sovereign gold bonds are not backed by physical gold. They give you gold price exposure. They are tax efficient, but they are not backed by gold. Second, they are very, very illiquid. Say if you want to move out, say gold goes stratospheric and you want to get out of gold and or book profits in gold, it will be very, very difficult after 2-3 years to do in a sovereign gold bond. But if you have an ETF, you can buy it any time, you can sell at any time. They're very, very liquid and you get market prices when you go in and out, right? Sovereign gold bonds, although they are listed, they're traded at a significant discount. So you need to keep all these into account and see what you're comfortable with. So given that gold ETFs are backed with physical gold, they are very, very liquid. I prefer gold ETFs. So depending on what you choose, what is your priority? Is it returns only, or you need comfort that it is backed by physical gold and I can get in and get out at any point in time whenever I need money? Then I think gold ETFs are better.
Sure. Thanks, Chirag. Pankaj, if inflation is increasing, is it wise to invest in bond funds?
See, investment choice actually depends on the asset allocation, but when we look at inflation, don't look at just the past inflation. So we have seen inflation rising in the last 1.5 years, but mainly because of spike in food inflation, food prices. There has been some inflationary component from hike in taxes on fuel and price of gold that has actually increased, which is also part of inflation basket. But whether the future inflation will show the similar kind of trend what we have seen now, the expectation, even our expectation and the RBI's forecast, even if you look at RBI's forecast, they expect inflation to come down to more comfortable level, closer to their target level, which is at 4% by mid of 2021. So it's always the forward inflation which actually guides the bond returns. So as of now, we don't see that kind of pain in the forward inflation. Still that thesis of bond investment that actually holds.
Thanks, Pankaj. Nilesh, next question's for you. If the government is borrowing and increasing its spending, will the capex cycle go up again?
Yeah, unfortunately, the government has to spend right now because the private sector is not spending. The capex cycle, especially the private capex cycle, has been dead for the last few years. And to keep the economy going, the government has had to do a significant amount of increased fiscal spending. At some point, demand will pick up, and at some point, capacity utilizations will hit a threshold for corporate capex to set up incentivize corporates to set up new capex again. We think perhaps it's a couple of years away, but it will happen as gradually demand inches up. But the corporate capex will not pick up because government is spending. Government is spending because the corporate cycle is capex is not happening. So we'll have to wait and give it a couple of years, but it will pick up. It's a normal cycle. You've had excess capacity, which is now getting drained out from the system. A lot of people who are not viable are shutting down. Demand is slowly inching higher. And so the strong players, once they hit a threshold of 80-85% in terms of capacity utilization, you will see a pickup in capex cycle.
Sure. Chirag, some questions on the multi-asset fund. Can you elaborate on the tax treatment of the fund at the time of redemption?
Sure. So if you are an investor that holds up to 3 years, then it is taxed as a short-term capital gains for you, which is as per your tax slab. It is exactly taxed like a debt fund, right? So if your holding is less than 3 years, then it is as per your tax slabs. And if it is above 3 years, it is 20% with indexation. When I say 20% with indexation, usually comes as a rate of about 10%, given that what we've seen in the past, the indexation rates, it comes to around 9-10%, around those levels. So that is, so if you're, say if you're an investor with a horizon of more than 3 years, And if you look at it as an alternative to your fixed deposits, given that you're taking slightly higher risk and not guaranteed returns, but still, if you have that view, it is much more tax friendlier than your fixed deposits. With fixed deposits, any duration that you have, you are taxed at your marginal tax slabs. Whereas in this, if you hold it for 3 years or more, you are charged 20% with indexation, which comes down to around less than 10% tax. So it works out much, much better for investors who are looking for a 3-year plus horizon, given that it is much tax. So if you're in highest tax bracket, any time that you park in your fixed deposits, it's more than 30% tax. And if you're in a multi-asset fund with a 3-year plus horizon, it comes down to less than 10% tax. So it is much, much tax friendlier.
All right. Nilesh, what are your views on small caps?
Yeah, I mean, they have done really well once the bottom got hit in the market in the March. So if you see the rally, they've led the rally. They are still far away from their highs, which they made a couple of years ago. So small caps had a very strong run from 2013 to 2018 or start of 2018, and they started correcting from the month of Jan 2018. And since then, they have seen a significant correction. Again, my view is investors, especially in India, should have most of their allocation in the larger high quality names. Because when you look at very long periods of time, compared to the risk that you're taking of investing in small caps, where the management quality is not that great, the business model is not proven, and most of the companies fail to scale up, the risk adjusted returns of small caps are not that great. They have, even in absolute returns over long periods of time, they've trailed the larger caps. So most of your money should be in larger names, perhaps out of your equity portfolio, 80-85%. And the balance 10 to 15% of the equity portfolio, you can look at investing in mid and small caps. But like I said, you need to be careful in that bucket, given the quality of management is there.
Sure. Thanks, Nilesh. Pankaj, the next question is for you. Could you please provide your outlook on PSUs? Currently, PSUs are trading at attractive valuations and they are paying out dividends consistently.
Yeah, I think I will step in, because I think it's an
equity
question. So, I mean, like you said, they are very, very attractive. They are trading at valuations we've not seen for a long time. I think dividend yields for a lot of them are up in the range of 5, 6, 7%. You had a problem over the last few years where government has offloaded a lot of stake in these companies to meet their fiscal deficit targets. And unfortunately, most of these stakes have been sold at a slightly lower price than the market price, which forces arbitrages to sell in the market and buy in the FPO or wherever the government is offloading stake, driving the prices even lower. Looks like there has been a change of strategy at the government level, where they are now suggesting they would look at these PSUs to do a buyback rather than government doing an offloading of stake. I mean, that strategy can change immediately overnight if the government needs money. But again, purely on valuations, they are attractive. Whether the government stops damaging their value by doing things which they shouldn't, I'm not sure. And whether they will give great returns for the next 1-2 years and beat their private sector peers, again, I'm not sure. But if you were to just ask me whether on valuations, do they make sense? Yes, they make sense.
Sure. Thanks, Nilesh. Chirag, would you say the selling in gold is over, or should we expect more correction in prices once a vaccine is out there?
I think before the vaccine comes out and it's kind of distributed widely, I think you will see a lot of stimulus from these governments overall. If you see this, the recovery that we were seeing in the global world has been slowing down, especially in US and Europe, given that the stimulus has been fading. There is a second surge in virus cases. So all that is impacting growth out there. So you will see stimulus from these governments before you see the vaccine kind of distributed. So I think much of the bad news or the optimism surrounding vaccine is over. I think we also seen a resurgence in consumption demand. So from that perspective, I think that doesn't look like big downsides for gold from here on. Of course, it's an asset can trade in and out and be tuned to the selling and buying. But overall, I think the bad news to a large extent has been priced in, given that the chart that we had shown vis-a-vis the money supply, I think it's come below that trend line overall, the money supply line. So from that perspective, also it starts looking attractive now, given that we anticipate more stimulus, more action from governments overall. So I think the correction that we've seen is kind of a good opportunity for one to get it.
All right. So with that last question, we've come to the end of the Q&A. Thank you again to our speakers. I will now request you for your closing comments. Nilesh.
Yeah, thank you so much for attending. It's been a very insightful question and answer session, very long. I hope you found it sort of value add. Again, my advice to investors is if you're looking at logging out from equities or booking your profits, assuming valuations are expensive, please do not do that. There are catalysts in place which could take it even higher. And if it corrects, you can always add more. People wanting to invest lump sum right now, and if you have 100 to invest, perhaps you can invest 75. The balance 25% you can invest if the markets were to give you some sort of correction. But apart from that, staying invested right now makes a lot more sense. Those who know our history know we are a very conservative fund and tend to be usually bearish in outlook, especially over the last few years. But right now, looking at the data and looking at what we are hearing from companies, it is making us a lot more bullish. And our sense is interest rates will remain low and central bankers will continue to print. Perhaps equity returns will surprise on the upside over the next few years, and investors should stay invested. Thank you so much.
Pankaj, your closing comments, please.
So, investors who are looking for debt investments, investment in fixed income instruments, first thing, always know that fixed income is meant for stability. So, my advice is avoid much of credit risk in your portfolio. Look for safer options. If you are investing in long duration fund, have a longer holding period. Don't invest for very short period in longer duration. If you are investing for shorter period, invest into liquid fund or these kind of options. And investors who cannot tolerate volatility of the longer duration funds, it's better to stick to liquid fund or ultra short-term fund or these kind of categories despite their low returns, and taper your return expectation. Now it's the time you have to lower down your return expectations. Thank you.
Chirag, your comments, please.
Yeah, have an allocation to gold at all times. You cannot predict times like global financial crisis or COVID. It kind of suddenly comes and impacts your entire portfolio. Gold is one asset that helps you during those times to tide through. So have an allocation to gold. To have a 10 to 15% allocation to gold. Don't go up. It kind of don't look at from a return perspective, though risk-given returns comparable to equities, but look at it from a risk mitigation perspective. It helps your portfolio significantly when times are bad. And always maintain a balanced portfolio, no matter how rosy an equity outlook or debt outlook or gold outlook may be. You need to have asset allocation across, like if you were 100% invested in equities before COVID, your equity, you would have seen significant loss of value. So having balanced allocation spread across asset classes, don't get carried away by just an outlook or better outlook on one asset class. Have a balanced approach, go into multi-asset fund, which invests in equities, debt, and gold.
Thank you, Chirag. Wonderful. We hope these insights will add value to your investment journey. So thank you again, investors, for tuning in. We hope we've answered most of your questions. However, if you have any further queries, please write to us at customercare@quantumemc.com. And with that, curtains down on this one. Thanks.
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.